In the morning, fa la la, la 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 la. I don't. I'm recording this in the morning on a certain day, having completed the East Rotherhithe walk, which we did the other day in the evening. This is another ASMR edition because the people that I went with, they didn't seem, certainly some of them didn't seem the type to want to get involved in a discussion. Certainly, and some didn't seem the type, and some I didn't want to press into service like that quite yet. I'll just get straight into it. It's from the same book, London's Hidden Walks, Metro Publications. Check it out. Everybody was there on time. It wasn't my usual crowd. Various friends, but not the usual mob. They couldn't make it for various reasons. It could be a band name, The Various Reasons. The walk begins at Canada Water Underground Station in Rotherhithe, which has like 6 exits. He doesn't tell you which one to exit at, which is like that's a minus point from the start. But it didn't seem to stop us from finding each other quite easily. What with mobile phones these days. So from the station, follow the map along the north side of Canada Water, formerly known as Canada Dock. Canada Dock was opened in 1876 to hold grain and timber, much of it originating from Canada, and was one of 10 docks in this area owned by the Surrey Commercial Docks Company until the company's closure in 1970. So it starts with quite a lot of infrastructure. Infrastructure is important, but it's hard to make it exciting. We need a couple of quotes or something from. It's just a very mature thing to think about infrastructure. This beginning part, it reminds me of something I heard the historian David Starkey say. He said that back then, he was talking about Tudor times, London was like a water world. Sort of villages on hills amidst water, and everything dotted up and down the Thames with boats. I kind of understood that. Anyway, there's this, he says, then he tries to direct us to Greenland Dock, and this was quite difficult. The map, I'm only just beginning to really look at maps. So previous to these excursions, I've only really known how to get from my place to Soho and direct routes to other places. I've never really done much map reading because I live in North London and it's on a hill. When I hear south, I think down, and when I hear north, I think up. That's the problem. So there's that. So it was a little bit confusing getting to the real start of the walk, which is Greenland Dock. Um, at the northeast corner, head through the car park onto Surrey Quays Road and bear right. You pass the retail park on the left and head straight over to Brunswick Quay. The quay lies on the north side of the huge Greenland Dock. Originally called the Howland Great Wet Dock when it opened in 1696. This is the oldest dock south of the Thames, and it was also once the largest commercial dock in the world. It was originally used to refit the ships of the East India Company, and from the 1720s was used by whaling ships from Greenland, hence the name. Blubber boiling houses used to line the south side of the dock, the end product being whale oil, used to light lamps. From 1807 the dock was used principally for timber and grain imports. This did look fantastic actually. It looked very futuristic, like, I know it sounds counterintuitive, but like kind of in design, it's like something from the new Dune film, which I didn't really love, but I liked some of the design aspects and it had good bits. But that's a different podcast. Greenland Dock is it's this huge rectangle of water basically. Greenland Dock is a relatively rare survivor of the old Surrey Docks complex that collectively covered over 150 acres of water, making this part of Rotherhithe resemble a giant lake on 19th century maps. Sadly, many of the neighbouring docks were filled in after the Surrey Docks closed, unable to cope with competition from larger docks outside London and the introduction of containerisation. Greenland Dock covers 22.5 acres and is surrounded by a number of residential developments built on and named after the old timber warehouses that once stood here. Brunswick Yard became Brunswick Quay, Swedish Yard became Swedish Quay, etc. The dock is now used extensively for water sports. Look out for the cormorants, Canada geese and swans that like to visit. Skirt around the north side of the dock. Throughout this walk I was constantly worried that we weren't going the right way, and at a certain point we definitely weren't going the right way and we missed a couple of things. I think it's when you've got people relying on you, it puts a little bit of pressure on you, and that pressure, I need to get more comfortable with that and just more centered, and used to reading maps. It's kind of more difficult in the dark. I'll come to that later. Skirt around the north side of the dock, passing a bust of James Walker on the left. Walker worked as the chief engineer on many of the great docks that were built in London during the 19th century, and also designed a number of bridges and lighthouses around the country. One member of our party said he might have been a right bastard, but he built lighthouses, and he had this firm smile on the sculpture. Crossover over a couple of mid-19th century swing bridges to stand by the old lock gates facing the Thames on the south-east corner. There was a ribald party atmosphere in the group, I think, and early on, joshing and questioning and stuff. It was fun. Just beside here is the 19th century tide gauge house facing the river, which was used you which was used to work out the state of the tide so the lock gates onto the Thames could be operated efficiently. I should get used to it not having to be precise and exact, but more fun. I mean, it's nice to get every bit of info, but you will miss bits, I'm sure. If you're having fun, you know what I mean? Anyway, continue along the Thames path, passing the Greenland Pier River bus stop. Shortly, you pass over another narrow bridge which crosses the entrance to South Dock. This dock was originally called the East Country Dock and was built in 1807 to 11, so it took 4 years, and connected to Greenland Dock by the Greenland Cut. South Dock is about 1/3 of the length of Greenland Dock and is now London's largest marina. During World War II, it was emptied of shipping and used for the building of the Mulberry floating harbours that were invaluable to the Allies after D-Day in June 1944. So that's interesting. The docks you have visited were once connected to the now closed Grand Surrey Canal. Do you see that Waterworld thing that I'm talking about? Or Starkey? Starkey said it was like Venice. This canal was opened in 1809 and ran for 3 miles down to Camberwell, with 2 small offshoots forming the Croydon Canal and the Peckham branch. Because of competition from the railways, the Grand Surrey Canal eventually became uneconomical and closed in the 1940s, with most of the canal being filled in during the 1960s. However, if you ever look at an old map of London, there are plenty for you to view on the internet. It's fascinating to see how prominent on the landscape the old canal and docks were. Today, often the only trace of them is a municipal park lying on top of a filled-in dock basin, or a road running along the line of what was once a canal. Starkey said that the Romans were all about roads, and post-Romans, Anglo-Saxons, etc., it was all about rivers and water. Now, at this point, members of the party who hadn't realised that we were actually walking to Greenwich weren't happy when they realised we were walking to Greenwich. They thought we were walking back their way to where they live. No, so they died. They just died where they were standing, and we pushed their bodies into the water and said a prayer and walked on, somewhat back the way we came. Continue along the Thames path, where shortly on the right is a stone. No, we had to cross over something to get to this. Yeah, we didn't take the right turn. Yes, this was a confusing area. But anyway, we got back on track. Continue along the Thames path, where shortly on the right is a stone marking the parish boundary of St Mary's Rotherhithe and St Paul's Deptford. Until 1899, it also marked the boundary of Kent and Surrey. You are now in Deptford, an area sandwiched between Southwark to the west and Greenwich to the east. For many centuries, Deptford was really 2 places: the tiny fishing village of Deptford Strand by the Thames and Deptford itself. The latter was surrounded by Kent countryside and was based around the Deep Ford. That's in quotations, hence Deptford, across the River Ravensbourne. Today's Deptford Bridge, just south of Deptford High Street, stands on the same location as the old ford. Deptford's fortunes changed forever in 1513 when Henry VIII, father of our greatest Queen, Elizabeth I, decided to base first a Royal Naval storehouse and then later a dockyard here. Henry was attracted to the area. It was his nearest favourite palace at Greenwich, and also his London-based royal armouries. Before 1513, munitions and cannons from the Royal Armouries had to be transported all the way to Portsmouth, where the original naval dockyard was based. Henry also founded the naval dockyard at Woolwich around the same time. The foundations of the royal dockyards meant Deptford grew rapidly and it became an important town. Over 350 Navy ships were built in Deptford's yards over the centuries, and many more were supplied or victualled and repaired here. One notable example was HMS Neptune, which was launched here in 1797 and was one of the main battleships at the Battle of Trafalgar in 1805. After the battle, the Neptune helped tow the crippled HMS Victory, which was carrying Nelson's body, back to Gibraltar. Kiss me, Hardy. Can't I kiss you softly? Gradually the waters in Deptford began to silt up, eventually becoming too shallow to launch the larger vessels the Navy needed. Wonder why that is. The shipbuilding yards finally closed in 1869, and the 27-acre site was subsequently used as a foreign cattle market until 1912. Deptford remained a victualling yard for the Navy for another 100 years, but increasingly had to rely on other industries and began to sink into obscurity compared to Greenwich, its more upmarket neighbour. Fortunes. Continue down Deptford Wharf, which formerly contained a wet dock used for convict transport ships en route to Australia, past the Aragon Tower. One member of our party was like, that tower looks really new and the name sounds very old. There's an Aragon in Lord of the Rings, isn't there? And he was into Old English and Middle English. Past the Aragon Tower and the Pepys estate to the right. This is good. The latter is named after Samuel Pepys, the famous English diarist who was a regular visitor to Deptford shipbuilding yards in his role as a senior naval official. He recounts these visits in detail in his diary, as well as his more clandestine trips to see his lover, Mrs. Bagwell. Mr. Bagwell was a carpenter in a dockyard who sacrificed, somebody questioned this term, his wife to Pepys in order to benefit from Pepys' patronage. In his entry for the 20th of February 1665, Pepys recorded how he found Bagwell's wife, whom I directed to go home, and I would do her business, which was to write a letter to my Lord Sandwich for her husband's advance into a better ship, as there should be occasion, which I did, and by did go down by water to Deptford Yard, and then down further, and so landed at the lower end of the town, and it being dark, did privately enter en la maison de la femme Bagwell, and there I had sa compagnie, though with great difficulty. Ni moins en fin je fait malvolonté. Eventually I had my way, it being now near o'clock, and there I did drink some strong waters and eat some bread and cheese. As we learnt on one of his previous books, he loved his Parmesan cheese. He probably said to Mrs. Bagwell, "You to me are like a fine Parmesan cheese, and you smell the same." Now, this is darker. Deptford Wharf becomes Deptford Strand, scene of one of the most notorious murders in literary history. On the 20th of May 1593, the playwright Christopher Marlowe was arrested on a charge of atheism at a time when such a heresy could lead to being burnt at the stake. Surprisingly, he was granted bail. I wonder what led to that. Surprisingly, he was granted bail, but 10 days later was murdered in a lodging house on Deptford Strand. The official coroner's report, only rediscovered in 1925, records his murder by Ingram Fraser as being an act of self-defense after Marlowe flew onto one of his characteristically violent rages. However, his companions in the house were also agents of the Elizabethan Secret Service under the great spy master Sir Francis Walsingham, and Marlowe is known to have carried out spying activities himself. I need to find out more about that. The official report records how Marlowe and his three companions met in Deptford Strand in a room in the house of a certain Eleanor Bull. After supper, the said Ingram and Christopher Morley, aka Marlowe, were in speech and uttered one to the other diverse malicious words, for the reason that they could not be at one nor agree about the payment of the sum of pence, that is, the reckoning. Marlowe gave the aforesaid Ingram 2 wounds on his head. In defence of his life, Ingram gave the said Christopher a mortal wound over his right eye of the depth of 2 inches, of which mortal wound Marlowe there instantly died. Officially, therefore, Marlowe died in a fight over a bill. However, his murderer was soon pardoned, and many think the playwright was assassinated on Walsingham's orders. Marlowe, who in his short life penned Tamburlaine, The Jew of Malta, Dr. Faustus, Edward II. Did Jarman make that film? Was it of the play? And The Massacre at Paris, was buried in Deptford's parish church of St. Nicholas. Seen later. Shakespeare paid tribute to Marlowe in his play As You Like It, quoting some of Marlowe's own poetry and including the lines, "When a man's verses cannot be understood, nor a man's good wit seconded with the forward child, understanding it strikes a man more dead than a great reckoning in a little room." A reference to the alleged murder over the reckoning in Deptford Strand. I need to think about those words. I thought Marlowe was supposed to be Shakespeare as well, some people say. This was confusing. This was a confusing moment. We missed some things here. Yeah, there was confusion here. It's probably down to my poor map reading skills, but I'm not letting this guy off. He says if you walk down Longshore on the right, but there's nothing marked as Longshore on the map. Oh. Okay. Yeah, it's confusing because you have, on the map you've got 9, 11, 10. You know, how does that work? There's there's some confusing choices in this. If you walk down Longshore on the right and then back along the Thames Path, you'll see a number of older buildings which are all that remain of the Navy's extensive victualling yards, which kept ships and their crews supplied with provisions. The houses along Longshore, known as the Terrace, were used by naval officers, date from the 1780s. The buildings facing the Thames behind the cannon were used to store rum and have now been converted for residential use. That's interesting. I was semi-panicking a bit at this moment because I was like, what's gonna... And it seems like we I need to get more together on it. We missed something good, I think. Other warehouses stored everything required for sea journeys, including biscuits, mustard and chocolate. There were also slaughterhouses within the complex, with the butchered meat being salted in order to preserve it. The area was renamed the Royal Victoria Yard after Queen Victoria's visit in 1858, and the 35-acre site remained in use until around 1961, after which most of the land was used for the construction of the Pepys estate. Walk past the storehouses and ahead you can see behind a fence a number of commercial buildings not accessible to the public that occupy the site of the old Navy shipyards. At this point you have to head inland to walk around the site, but before doing so look out for the plaque on the front of the storehouse building. We didn't do this. That recalls how Sir Francis Drake was requested by Queen Elizabeth I to permanently berth his famous ship, the Golden Hind, in Deptford Creek in 1581, as a memorial to his having circuited around the whole earth. On the 4th of April of that year, she dined on the ship and knighted the great explorer, and the Hind remained in Deptford Creek for 100 more years, until it eventually fell apart. Deptford was also where many great early voyages of discovery began, including those under the leadership of Sir Walter Raleigh, Martin Frobisher, and Captain James Cook. This spirit of exploration was well captured by Joseph Conrad in his classic book, The Heart of Darkness. I thought The Heart of Darkness is more darker than joyful, though. They based Apocalypse Now on it. Conrad was a seasoned sailor himself and knew the area well, writing of how they had sailed from Deptford, the adventurers and the settlers, hunters for gold or pursuers of fame. They had all gone out on that stream, the dreams of men, the seed of commonwealth, the germs of empires. Perhaps unsurprisingly, he named the main character of his book Marlowe. An information board facing the Thames also recalls how whales were commonly seen in the river in the past centuries, and on June 2nd, 1658, the diarist John Evelyn recorded seeing one that was 58 feet long and was killed by Deptford residents after a long conflict with the harping aeons. 58 feet long. That is long. I wonder what kind of a whale that was. Why'd they have to kill it? I followed the map past the playground into Pepys Park and then right along Foreshore and left at Bow Ditch to rejoin Pepys Park. What? Head diagonally across the grass in the shadow of some of Deptford's tower blocks. Head left along Grove Street, looking out on the left-hand side for some old naval dockyard gates, and continue until you see the entrance to the secluded Sayes Court Garden. We found it, thanks to GPS, mostly. I think I could have done it on my own, but I didn't want to hold people up and get them involved as well. Sayes Court Garden, I think it was shut. This is interesting though. This stands on the site of the house where John Evelyn lived from 1652. Evelyn's diary is an important record of 17th century life, as he interacted with some of the great men of his age, including Sir Christopher Wren, Samuel Pepys, and Charles II. Although I've heard of Pepys, I've never heard of Evelyn before. He recorded his day-to-day experiences during great events such as the Great Plague and the Great Fire of London, and the death of Charles I. I wonder if Mrs. Bagwell turns up in his diaries as well. A gifted amateur architect and landscaper, he proposed a grand plan to Charles II for the rebuilding of the city after the Great Fire. Evelyn laid out a beautiful garden here on the 100 empty acres that originally surrounded his house. Grinling Gibbons, who we met when we were doing the city walk, if anybody's listened to that, the famous woodcarver, lived in a poor solitary thatched house in a field within Evelyn's grounds. Gibbons came to England from Rotterdam to work as a carpenter in the Royal Dockyard. However, in 1671, Evelyn discovered his tenant's remarkable talents as a carver and recommended him to Wren. Wren subsequently employed Gibbons to carve many of the furnishings that still adorn some of London's finest churches and palaces. Samuel Pepys was a regular visitor here, recording in his own diary on October the 4th, 1665, that Evelyn showed me his gardens, which are full of a variety of evergreens and hedge of holly, the finest things I ever saw in my life. Charles II also visited here in February 1663, the diarist recording, "Came His Majesty to honour my poor villa with his presence, viewing the gardens and even every room of the house." The house and its then famous gardens were later wrecked. Listen to this. Were later wrecked by Deptford's most surprising resident, Tsar Peter the Great of Russia. Peter lived in Deptford for 3 months in 1698 to learn the art of shipbuilding. Staying at Sayes Court, which was rented from Evelyn, the Tsar pretended to be an ordinary carpenter in a nearby dockyard. However, his great stature, he was 6 foot 7 inches tall, Russian accent, and wildly extrovert personality probably meant no one was fooled. Peter's time in London was part of a long European tour whose purpose was to learn Western ideas and techniques that could be taken back to modernise feudal Russia. Peter enjoyed a drink with his party-loving entourage, the latter described by Evelyn's disgusted estate steward as being full of right nasty people. The Russians wrecked Evelyn's house and garden. The carpets were soiled and ruined, his paintings used for target practice, and 50 chairs destroyed. To Evelyn, the worst calamity was the destruction of his prized holly bush after it was rammed through by a wheelbarrow with the drunken Tsar of Russia sitting inside. Craziness. One of our party said they could make a film of this, and I think they could. In 3 months, the Russians inflicted £350 of damage, substantial sum back then, which Sir Christopher Wren, on behalf of the Treasury, repaid to a very annoyed Evelyn. The diarist recorded an entry on June 9, 1968, that he went to Deptford to view how miserably the Tsar of Muscovy had left the house. Sayes Court was demolished in 1728, and a workhouse was built on the site before it became part of the Royal Victoria Yard. The fenced-in tree at the centre of the park is thought to be a survivor from Evelyn's garden. On the other side of the park, exit onto Sayes Court Street and walk down it before heading left into Prince Street. Head left at Watergate Street. Here, a member of our party stopped us to make us look at these fences and asked us what they were made of. And turns out they were made of First World War or Second World War stretchers. So I'll put some photos of that here. That was a nice insert by that guy. This becomes Borthwick Street, and at the end, behind the wall on the left-hand corner, you see the Master Shipwright's house of 1708, built for Joseph Allen. It is also known, ironically, as the Shipwright's Palace, on account of the scandal that erupted about how much public money was being used to fund the construction. The old warehouses facing the Thames are currently being redeveloped, and the wall of the former dockyard runs alongside the street. Yeah, I think we saw that. Yeah, we did see that. Yeah. Continue down we stopped. We went up somewhere and had a cigarette. Somebody needed a break. Like, really, man. People are so... Break. Come off it. Then we continued back on the walk. I think during this break we spotted a fox in a boat, mucking about as if it was going to take the boat out for a ride. I think we've got photos, but I'm not sure they do it justice. Continue down Deptford Green to reach the Church of St Nicholas on the left. The church was founded at the latest in the 12th century, and its ragstone tower, if you get a proper picture of it, it really is ragstone. It looked very, very, very moody. It was good and moody, this. Its ragstone tower is largely 14th century. The remainder of the church dates principally from a reconstruction in 1697, with further work carried out after damage was inflicted during the Blitz. The main gate contains two distinctive 17th century skull and crossbone carvings, typical of the memento mori designs of the era, which were designed to remind the congregation of the inevitability of death. These were incredible. Like the size of beach balls. Like, I wouldn't imagine them on a Christian church. They were satanic, like Iron Maiden or something. Like, that was something else, man. Yeah, they were really sticking to mind. Like, it's incongruous to the modern mind. The old charnel house lies opposite the entrance to the church. The church contains a fine reredos and a panel depicting Ezekiel in a valley of the dry bones, which is thought to be the work of Grinling Gibbons again. There is also a memorial on the west walls to Richard and Mary Evelyn, the children of John Evelyn, the diarist. Yes, we couldn't get in it though. We couldn't get in it, but here he says, because it was late at night, I suppose. The northeast corner of the churchyard, or something to do with COVID, the northeast corner of the churchyard contains a memorial to Christopher Marlowe, who was buried here in an unmarked grave. Why unmarked? After his murder in Deptford Strand, and whose death was recorded in the surviving church register for the 1st of June 1593 as slain by Francis Freezer. The vicar's misspelling of the murderer Ingram Fraser's name in this official record caused historians much confusion in later years. The memorial contains the poignant line from Marlowe's Dr. Faustus: "Cut is the branch that might have grown full straight." A reminder that had he lived longer, the playwright could have rivaled Shakespeare in terms of worldwide reputation. Maybe they're talking about his sexuality, though. Perhaps those who laid the memorial thought it fit not to quote Marlowe's infamous remark, attributed to him by a government spy, that all they that love not tobacco and boys are fools. On the northeast side of the church is an exit that leads to an area near the Thames used by the East India Company between 1600 and 1782, and which was later the site of the world's first high-voltage electric power station. The station was opened in 1891 and designed by Sebastian Gianni di Ferranti. It remained in use until 1983. Oh, I should say a female of a party had gone. She evaporated into thin air before this. Yeah, she was long gone. So then there were just 4 of us. It remained in use until the elite. It remained in use until 1983, later being demolished and built over to create the Fairview housing development, which today contains a modern statue of Peter the Great. Yeah, we didn't see that. However, on this walk, continue south down Deptford Green and head right up Millen Street, cross over Busy Creek Road to walk down Deptford High Street. The High Street has a vibrant atmosphere and hosts a great street market each Wednesday, Friday and Saturday. In recent years, some have described Deptford as the new Shoreditch because of its popularity with artists, students and musicians. The High Street contains a number of old artisan buildings built in the late 18th century. Number 34 was once Chapman's Oil. We didn't go all the way down it. Number 34 was Chapman's Oil and Colour Shop, and it was here that Mr. and Mrs. Farrow were murdered by the Stratton brothers in 1905. Stratton, it's a horrible name, isn't it? It sounds like killers. The case is notable because it was the first time a murder conviction was secured in this country using fingerprint evidence, and the Strattons were hanged as a result. Stay away from the Stratton brothers. Number 146 was the site of an old Quaker meeting house that was demolished in 1907. Peter the Great attended meetings in the old building during his stay in Deptford, discussing religion with William Penn, the founder of the American state of Pennsylvania. Just to the south of the High Street, although I do not suggest you walk down this far, is Deptford Bridge, once an important crossing point over the River Ravensbourne, as mentioned earlier. Medieval pilgrims to Canterbury would pass along this route when leaving London, and in Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, Deptford is mentioned in the following lines from the Reeves prologue. Tell forth your tale, and do not waste the time. Here's Deptford, and it's halfway to prime. There's Greenwich town that many a scoundrel's in. It's high time your story should begin. Take the second left along the High Street onto Albury Street. This contains a number of fine houses built by a local bricklayer named Thomas Lucas from 1705, and which are particularly notable for their elaborately carved door cases. They were originally used as houses for sea captains and shipwrights connected to the naval shipyards, and legend has it that Nelson's mistress, Lady Hamilton, once lived here. Follow Albury Street to the end and bear right, which leads you through a small play. We met a lady, said, do you know where you want to go? There's a small playground and gardens. Well, she helped us out anyway. North Gate. Anyway, it took us to St Paul's Church, which looked very good. It did look great, but we couldn't get very near it, but it did look good. One of the finest Baroque churches in London. It was built in 1713 to 30 by Wren's pupil Thomas Archer in Portland stone, and contains a distinctive semicircular portico. At the time the church was built, Deptford had become a substantial town in its own right, and was known for attracting religious and political dissenters. In 1710, the newly elected Tory government felt it necessary to reaffirm the power of the Church of England in London's newer towns and suburbs, and embarked on a programme to build 50 new churches. They didn't build all of those, but St Paul's was typical. Typical of those that were, as it has a grandeur designed to remind the local population that the Church of England was still at the heart of the country's religious life. Just south of the church is Deptford Station, one of the stopping points on the Greenwich to London Bridge Railway line, which we learnt about on the last walk but one. Not much to look at there. Exit the church on the Deptford, across down Burton Street to visit. This was a confusing moment as well, but we got there. To the Laban Dance Studio. Whilst the studio is principally for use of dancers, the public can attend performances and visit parts of the building, such as the cafe. The building was designed by Herzog and de Meuron, architects. Meuron? Most architects are morons, aren't they? Architects of the Tate Modern, and won the prestigious Sterling Prize for Architecture in 2003. You can book guided tours of one of the architectural triumphs of Southleaf, London, despite the deep green gardens to the front that resemble the set of Teletubbies. The studio also looks fantastic at night when the lime, magenta and turquoise colours shine out spectacularly. That is overselling it. It was alright. It wasn't all that. I'm sorry, man. Really, it wasn't. This was a nice bit, continuing along Creek Road. It was cold, though. But not really. Only on near exposed bits. Which aren't too many, hopefully. Continue along Creek Road to see on either side of the bridge the creek itself. It's one of the nicest creeks I've ever seen, in my top 5 of all the creeks I've ever seen. Of all the creeks I've known before. This is actually part of the River Ravensbourne, which rises at Caesar's Well in Keston. What's Caesar's Well? Where's Keston? Before flowing into the Thames 11 miles later. Like many of the docks and canals mentioned above, the creek has faded away and been built over in the last few decades. Just after the bridge, head left down Norway Street and follow the map to take you out onto the riverfront at Greenwich, which is at the end of this walk. The riverfront, again, where we finished the actual Greenwich disastrous walk and sat there and watched the fireworks. And we sat here again and talked about the walk. Ahead is the domed building that covers the Greenwich entrance of the Thames Foot Tunnel built in 1902, which takes you to the Isle of Dogs. The well-known tourist attraction of Greenwich lies ahead, including the Cutty Sark. Yeah, so that was the walk, and we sat there by the Cutty Sark and talked about our favourite things of the walk. Most people's favourite things were the very beginning, the great big dock, Greenland dock, Peeps, Marlow, the skulls on the church. Yeah, I think Elizabeth's first bit would have, because I like her, Pirate Queen. Peter the Great, people like that as well. I think everybody seemed to generally like the same things about it. Only the elite of the elite finished the walk, and then we're by the Cutty Sark, and that is pretty amazing. One of my few vices is I get trapped in playing these fucking computer games. Well, I shouldn't have sworn there, I'll bleep that. Right now I'm playing this one, Assassin's Creed Black Flag. Basically you're a pirate and you go out on these ships. Cutty Sark reminds me of that. We were saying how mad it would be to be out on that boat back then, especially in a high storm, and that happens in this game. I just need to get rid of it. It gets in the way of doing work, computer games, but it's like some of them, I don't know, when you don't have a proper holiday, it's like a holiday. Anyway, whatever, sorry. But the rigging and all of that, it's pretty amazing. And to finish then, I'm going to read this excerpt from Patience, which is a poem by the unknown Gawain poet, based on the story of Jonah and the whale. I'm just going to read this bit. It's Middle English, but it's Cheshire Middle English, so it's different apparently. But this is in honour of all those guys on those ships, and in honour of all people on future spaceships as well. So it says, thus he passes to that port, his passage to seek, finds he a fair ship, to the fair ready, matches him with the mariners, makes her pay, for to tow him into Tars as tight as they might. Then he tron on thou tres, and they her tram richen, catching up the cross-sail, cables they fasten, white at the windass, weighing her anchors, spence back to the spreet, the spare ballawin. Gathering to the guide ropes, the great cloth falls, they laden in on ladderboard, and the loft winds. The blithe breath at her back, the bosom he finds. He swings me this sweet ship, swift through the haven. I can read the translation, but I don't want to. I might not. Anyway, thanks for listening. There's a walk. I'm gonna give it 3. I need to work on my style. Anyway, thanks for listening. Bye bye.